Welcome to the nonStatic podcast, where we explore how to keep moving forward when motivation feels distant. Here we dive into finding peace and fulfillment in a busy world, discovering how to embrace life opportunities to live with purpose and joy. I'm John. This is my brother Josh. Josh, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
As usual.
Yeah, and this is nonStatic, where we just talk about stuff.
Yeah, things and stuff.
Things and stuff, stuff and things. How was your weekend?
It was great. I watched football. The anti-Chiefs conspiracy theorists aren't too happy this morning, so we'll just leave it at that. For those of you that are dismayed that the Chiefs are yet again going to their third Super Bowl in a row, you've received more fodder for your conspiracy theory about the refs favoring
The Chiefs.
and Patrick Mahomes. Yeah.
Is it because of Mahomes and Taylor Swift?
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Although I think that luster is kind of worn off, maybe a little bit, maybe not.
Well, I think it's one of those
Swiftie fans
scenarios in which people are they've become kind of the heel of the NFL, like the team that everybody loves to hate, perhaps.
Yeah.
And therefore, we overanalyze every call that goes our way. However, in
They do pay off the refs.
In the conspiracy theorist defense, there were some pretty
Suspicious
calls, but then there's also this thing called human error, which is part of what the beauty of the game is about. That's what makes sports interesting for a lot of people,
Right.
is the human error aspect of it, because you can have the most talented roster, but you can't account for human error. So anyway.
I was listening to I love listening to Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn, especially whenever they're together, because they're just two peas in a pod.
Sure.
Crazy redneck guy and crazy UFC guy, and they were talking about UFC fights, and they're talking about some particular guy, UFC fighter who's doesn't look all that strong. He looks pretty mean, like he's just gonna tear your throat out. But he doesn't punch all that hard. But he's very consistent, and he's just he's like the Energizer Bunny. He doesn't have any like KOs, like any knockout blows.
Yeah,
they just wear the other guy down, and he can go for the full. Was it 9? Is it 9 rounds?
Sure.
I believe it's 9 rounds.
I'm not a big
It's kind of sad of me to be asking that right now. It's too early. But they were just talking about how hard of a job it is to be a ref and to be umps and all that stuff. And Joe Rogan made the comment like, being he said, people get ticked off at these refs for calling a fight when someone clearly could keep going or. Yeah. But he said, their job is probably one of the hardest jobs in sports, because they are responsible for keeping both of the fighters alive.
I never thought of it that way. That's a good point.
That is their main. I mean, obviously they want to make fair calls, but they're the ones who are in charge of ensuring that both of them survive, and that's why they make these seemingly random calls to call the fight. Because if they see some behavior changes, or some guy's response is just kind of weird, or he turns into like a rag doll, then there's something going on, and that one next punch could kill the guy.
Yeah. And
so that's why they sometimes call fights, not to throw fights,
right? Allegedly.
But just to keep them alive. So that's a hard job.
It is a hard job, and we could go down a rabbit hole with the UFC, but you talk about the impact of concussions, and you talk about consistency over time, like that one fighter you were talking about who's consistent over time and can go the 9 rounds. But the other piece is consistency over time of getting punched in the head. The majority of there's a high percentage of these fighters that will have significant brain damage.
Oh yeah.
That you won't necessarily see now, but you'll definitely see it down the road, which is really quite sad.
This is gonna probably tick off some people who are pretty passionate about boxing and sports and stuff. But there was a really famous boxer. I don't know if it was Ali, but he lit the he was given the honor. He's dead now, but he was given the honor of lighting the Olympic torch.
Yeah, that was Muhammad Ali.
Was it Muhammad Ali?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the poor guy, like, I mean, he was shaking, and you could tell that he could barely function.
I believe he had Parkinson's.
He had Parkinson's
Yeah.
too, but he also had a lot of. I mean, it was a rough sport to be in.
Well, there's a reason why it's called boxer's brain.
Oof.
You know, there's those the brain injuries that are caused by constantly getting hit in the head. You know, there's a reason
Even
why
if they're not, even though those gloves are padded, even
Yeah.
though there's a lot of protections, but man,
Well, there's a reason why our natural instinct is to, when something is like if something suddenly comes our way, whether it's like a falling rock or a tree or something, our initial response is to cover our faces and our heads.
yeah, protect it.
And that's because our head is not meant to be hit over and over.
No, sure is not like that.
So
But hey, it's all for the love of the game and for being the alpha dog.
that's true.
I mean,
true.
there was I think I may have talked about it, but I watched a UFC fight with one of my neighbors, and we watched. Oh, it was the Jake Paul and your guy bit the guy.
Oh, Mike Tyson.
Oh my gosh,
that's
Mike
a
Tyson.
boxing match. Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
Mike Tyson.
yeah.
Hold
The
that.
70-year-old versus the 30-year-old.
Anyways, the fight before that was two female champions, and I could not get over how brutal they were. Like they.
Yeah. You know, we wonder. I always think. Sometimes I like to think, like, in the future, how will history look back on this period of time? And that's like one of the aspects I think of is someday in the very distant future, you know, way beyond our lives, history's they're gonna uncover these artifacts of this octagon shaped ring.
People used to beat the crap out of each other.
And they realized that, well, people beat the crap out of each other, and then they're going to compare it to the Roman gladiators. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but you kind of wonder how people will look back. Like, we look back on the gladiators in Roman Empire. I'm like, oh my gosh, how can anyone be so brutal, and how could a society get to that point? But you know,
at least we didn't kill. At least it wasn't last man standing.
Well, I agree. I mean, certainly, yeah. You're really
Most
not.
cases.
It's really not a fair comparison, and I'm not. I admire those athletes. I really do.
Same.
You know, my tattoo artist was a fighter, and she said she was an amateur fighter, and she said, I trained for months and months and months, and I got in the ring and I got my ass handed to me. And she said it was so tough. I'm like,
so humiliating.
Like the watching it, she said watching it doesn't do it justice to actually participating.
100%. Yeah. That's absolutely brutal. The pain tolerance and the discipline those people have is absolutely astounding. Yeah.
Better for thee and not for me, though. You won't see me getting in a ring anytime soon.
You want to do that?
No.
It's some clout, man. That's for sure. So what are we talking about today?
I wanted to, we talk a lot about kind of general concepts on the podcast, and so I kind of wanted to introduce more of a framework type of information today. One of the things that's really important for all of us as just human beings is to be aware of our emotions and identify how those emotions impact our daily living.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of wanted to identify, there's a 4-step framework that I want to talk about how to maintain your emotional health. So certainly, as we've talked before, this is not in place of counseling or psychotherapy or mental health treatment for people that have genuine disorders, but it's more a conversation about how do we maintain our emotional health on a day-to-day basis, given all the challenges and the stress that we're faced with in our society.
Right.
And so there's kind of 4 general ways, and these are kind of rooted in what a lot of us know as the cognitive behavioral therapy technique that a lot of therapists use when they treat individuals with depressive disorder. Yeah, good old CBT. And so I kind of wanted to walk through it with you and kind of pick get your thoughts about your reactions to it, and then kind of hopefully give the listeners or viewers, if you're on YouTube, kind of some practical things to latch on to as far as how do you maintain your emotional health on a given basis. So there's kind of 4 things I want to talk about, or 4 steps I should say. And so when you're the first thing that's really important to keep in mind is this sense of being self-aware. A lot of times or often in life, we just kind of are doing our best just to keep up. And we rush through our day being reactive rather than proactive. And we've talked about this a little bit before. But the whole goal of this is to be able to be more mindful and to be aware of what your thoughts are and then how your thoughts are impacting your emotional reactions to things. So the first step to maintaining your emotional health on a daily basis is to first recognize and label your thoughts. And again, we've kind of talked about this in the past. But as our brains are very good at following a script. Our brains are designed to learn, to figure out what is the quickest way to survive and what's the quickest way to get something done. And so it tends to follow the same script over and over. And it does the same thing with our thoughts. You'll notice when we encounter a situation, our brain tends to follow the same line of thinking over and over in a given situation. So
always do this.
Yeah, correction. So we gotta
mess up at that.
Well, true. And so that's what we call an automatic thought. And automatic thoughts aren't something that we consciously do. They're just thoughts that our brain creates based on habit. And so it's important to pay attention to those automatic thoughts, especially during stressful situations or situations that are fraught with conflict or even highly emotionally charged situations.
Sure.
Your point of an automatic thought is, I always do this. That is an automatic thought. And that's probably one of the most common ones that we have is, I always do this every time. Well, why is that? Because we haven't taken the time to really step back and remove ourselves psychologically from the situation and kind of assess it at different angles. And so the whole goal of recognizing and labeling your thoughts is to try to stop that automatic thinking. So it helps to identify thought patterns, and that gives you clarity and helps separate facts from assumptions.
Sure.
We're very good at, if we're not sure why something is occurring, we're very good at filling in an assumption and then taking that assumption as a fact. So if you notice, your thinking is saying, I always fail at this. Really? Is that really true? Really? You always fail?
Probably not.
Probably
but
not.
You probably fail more than, obviously you fail more than you'd prefer.
Right. But that's just simply, the fact of the matter is,
isn't it? Kind of like an excuse, like, I've always failed at this, so why try?
Well, I think it's a self-defeating. I mean, it could be a cop-out, maybe. Or it's a way to avoid, if you're always going to fail at something, why try to make it different, I suppose.
Right.
That
always takes me off. That always makes me want to try harder, like I'm going to prove myself wrong.
Yeah. But the key is just to kind of identify that thought and then label it as a negative automatic thought. And I would also add labeling it as a false narrative. For example, use the example, I always fail at this, or I always do this wrong. It's simply not true. And it's important for us to acknowledge that.
Right.
And the goal with that is to hopefully identify these thought patterns. So it's important to identify what the thought is. Is it a negative thought? And then why did it occur? Typically, as I said, our brains tend to follow a pattern of thinking. And so when we're faced with a challenge or a barrier or a problem, our brain tends to resort back to, I always do this wrong, or I always mess up. When the fact of the matter is, it's just simply not true.
Right. True.
So then the second thought is that once you've recognized and labeled those thoughts, it's important to challenge the negative or distorted thinking. What we call the term, when we say something like, I always fail at this, do you fail at some stuff? Yeah, of course, we all do, believe it or not. None of us are perfect. But the distorted piece comes into play when we say we always fail at something. That simply isn't true. If we always failed at something, you and I wouldn't be here right now, because we would have failed at getting to work, or we would have failed at getting up in the morning. So it's important to keep in mind distorted thoughts and not allow those distorted thoughts to become our reality. Well, how do you do that? The whole goal, the whole idea, and as far as what to do when you challenge negative or distorted thinking, is to examine the evidence for and against your thoughts to identify distortions. And this is what therapists do a lot in treatment with individuals who are depressed. So people that are chronically depressed and have major depressive disorder, one of the hallmarks of depression is constant negative thoughts that just flood them.
Right.
That's one of the hallmarks of someone that's clinically depressed is most of their thoughts are negative and they have this negative distortion. So what therapists do, one of the strategies and approaches that therapists use when they're working with somebody with depression is they have them write down their thoughts, particularly the negative thoughts, and then they examine the evidence for and against that thought.
Right.
And it's forcing them to kind of reckon with, what are you doing here? Reckon with, is this really true or is it not true based on the evidence? And it's kind of removing the emotional component of it and just kind of taking that thought and from a neutral standpoint, let's just look at the evidence here.
Right.
Does the evidence prove what you're saying?
That's what I've done for years myself. I've spoken about it before. Like I would have like a worry journal. Whenever I had a negative thought, I would stop. I had to make the commitment to stop everything whenever I had a negative thought, even if I'm like on the sidewalk walking to class or something. Or well, if I'm driving, I would literally pull over. And then I would address it immediately. I would write down my negative thought, and then I would just start writing a conversation with my negative thoughts and myself to work through it. And honestly, the negative side of my brain would eventually just give up and stop it with the negatives talking. So it took a lot of work writing down my negative thoughts and writing down my responses about how it's not true and what reality really is. Well, it was a lot of work at first. It ended up being a really beneficial thing for me it kind of reprogrammed my brain to stop assuming the worst and start assuming more positive stuff.
And the assuming the worst is a concept called catastrophizing.
Right.
What is catastrophizing? It's making something that is negative, making that out to be much worse than it really is.
Right.
So, for example, let's say I have an argument with my wife, okay? Catastrophizing would be, we had an argument, we must not have a strong relationship, therefore this relationship is going to end. You know what I mean? That's obviously a very simple idea of catastrophizing, but it's really taking something that's a part of in this case, something that happens in all relationships, it's conflict, and then generalizing that to...
You get conflict in your relationship with your wife?
Once in the past 20 years. Just once, though.
Jeez, dude.
Yeah, just once. Yep.
You guys going to be okay?
I'm just joking, obviously.
But my wife and I have never even frowned at each other.
Well, that is...
scary.
There's this other distorted thinking called
denial.
Called denial.
Yeah, denial.
So should we talk about denial a little bit?
Yeah, probably.
But catastrophizing is, again, something that is normal and I would argue healthy in a relationship in this example, which is conflict or arguments, and then extrapolating from that the relationship is bad and therefore it's going to end because of this conflict.
Right.
That's catastrophizing. The other example, and there's many different types of distortions that we can create. Mm-hmm. The other one is all or nothing thinking, and that is, because I did this once, therefore I always do it. Or if I can't get it right, in order to do it right all the time, I have to get it right this very first time. That's called all or nothing thinking. And what that does is it prevents any other perspective from entering into our thought process.
It's toddler way of thinking too.
Yeah.
We signed up my 7 and 5 year old for basketball, and my 7-year-old, love her to death, just threw herself on the floor. She didn't throw herself on the floor, but she was just super distraught because she doesn't like basketball. Well, why don't you like basketball? Well, I tried it once and I wasn't good at it.
That is a textbook example of all or nothing thinking. I tried it once, and therefore I'm not good at it.
I'm like, honey, you got to practice at it. And so she was the same thing with wrestling. Just went crying and kicking and screaming to wrestling. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yep.
Well, just keep on going in there. You'll figure it out. Now they want to make sure that we get there extra early so they don't miss any of the warm-ups. Same with ice skating, same with everything.
Yeah. Along with all or nothing thinking is the popular phrase that you hear a lot of, influencers say nowadays, and that, or so-called coaches. They'll often say, "Don't let the don't let perfection be the enemy of progress, And it's kind of to your point earlier when you're talking about the fighter who was not the best puncher, never had any knockouts, but he was consistent from being able to go the distance. And so
being deadly.
Now, if he had all or nothing thinking, and if I can't get a knockout, therefore I'm not a good fighter, that's all or nothing thinking. And the fact of the matter is, you can be successful in a lot of different ways other than just one.
Yeah, he made his weakness his strength, I think.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. But he was able to recognize that there's other ways to do something.
I can go all the rounds, no problem. And most everyone else is exhausted by that time.
Yeah. So why does it help to challenge those negative or distorted thinking? Well, reframing them fosters a more balanced and realistic perspective. Mm-hmm. We tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves or a lot of expectation on ourselves to be very high achievers a lot of times, and sometimes that can be the enemy of our progress in life. And so it's important to keep this idea of balance in our lives, knowing that we're not always going to be perfect, but if we're consistent over time, we will be able to achieve success. So an example is, I fail the test, I'll never succeed in school. You
fail the test.
That's an example of all or nothing thinking. Because I failed this one time, therefore I will never be successful again.
Right.
You should replace that with, well, I didn't succeed this one time, or I didn't pass the test this one time, but I can learn and improve and do better next time, as an example. Mm-hmm. So just a thought. So again, the first step is to recognize and label your thoughts. The second step is to challenge negative or distorted thinking. And I would just add, we tend to we like to cling to our negative thoughts a lot of times because
they're comforting.
They're comforting. It fits a narrative, and it kind of removes an element of personal responsibility to hold on to.
Is that why they're comfortable?
That's why they're comfortable.
Because you're relinquishing control. You're saying it's not my fault. There's nothing I can do about it.
Correct.
Which is
and let's see.
Biggest lie to yourself.
We're very comfortable staying the same, but we're very uncomfortable changing, and that's where the real work comes in. And that's why people, I think, are resistive to doing an exercise like this. I know there's probably people out there thinking that the two things I've told you, well, they're very simple and those are stupid. Why would I do those? And it's because there's natural resistance to it. And I get it. So anyway, recognize and label your thoughts, challenge negative and distorted thinking. And the third one is to practice adaptive strategies to cope with them. So now that you've identified your negative or distorted thoughts, now what are you going to do with it? And that's where the real challenge comes in. One of the themes that I have for myself this year is discipline. And discipline is really a skill that we have to master if we want to be able to overcome some of these negative thoughts and ultimately have better emotional health.
I think discipline is probably one of the most difficult skills anybody can master.
Because it is.
It really is.
Because it's the skill of embracing discomfort. And really essentially embracing something that you don't want to do to achieve something that you actually want.
Right.
And that's the
hard one.
That's the biggest challenge to all of us.
You have to die to yourself because we always want to find the path of the least resistance. Find the easiest thing to be as comfortable as possible all the time. Yeah. But we want all the glory without the hard work.
Yeah.
And that you're not going to get glory without discipline.
I was listening to John Maxwell speak. This was a couple of years ago. You and I were at that conference, and he was there. And he had talked a lot about how there was a gentleman.
Our friend. He's our friend.
But he was he was bringing up a scenario in which somebody that was listening to him came up afterwards and had him sign a book and whatever. And he goes, I want to be able to do what you do. And I'm sure he gets that a lot. We see these people on stage and influencers or whoever that are really successful.
Dude makes $500,000 just for a speaking engagement.
Yeah. We see these people that are really successful doing that. We see them on stage and we think, they're just talking on stage. And he said something really interesting. He said, my friend, you want to be where I am, but you don't want to be where I've been. And what you don't see is all the work behind the years and years and years of work and putting off comfort that allowed John Maxwell to get to that point of
Right.
being on the stage that in which he's inspiring others.
Right.
And so that's kind of where the discipline piece comes in.
Right.
And kind of where this piece is that practice adaptive coping strategies. I'm not saying we need to learn to cope. What I'm saying is replace unhealthy behaviors with more constructive habits. And so that's where the rubber really meets the road for a lot of us is, okay, you've identified that you have these negative thoughts. You have a choice now.
Mm-hmm.
You can either continue having those negative thoughts and allowing them to enter in over and over and over, or you can make a change. And that's where the challenge is we're now faced with a choice.
Right.
And at this point, we can either choose to make a change or we can choose to keep going down the same road we've been going on. And either way, suddenly now we're responsible for those negative thoughts if we continue to have them. So things like some people like using mindfulness, and some people like using journaling. I'm a big documenter and journal. I thrive off that stuff, and so I tend to push it a lot more. But it's for me, it's very therapeutic and very, very helpful. Or just seeking support from other individuals.
So how do you suggest somebody, I don't know if this is relating to it at all, but how do you, if someone notices, like, I guess one common example right now, because we're still in January, and for those of you who have escaped the quitting fairy.
Quitter's Day Fairy. Yeah.
Quitter's Day Fairy.
January 10th.
When people start having those negative thoughts, like, not today. How do you you got to give yourself a trigger to move past that or to distract yourself.
So I would flip the script.
That.
So I would say the not today, that's a negative thought. That's what I would say to that. If I was meeting with someone individually and they said I just not today, I would challenge that because that's a negative thought.
Yeah.
Why not today? And Ed Milet has a book called The Power of One More. And I wasn't planning to talk about this, but it fits. The Power of One More, and that is don't focus on everything you have to achieve. Just focus on the next right thing in front of you.
Right.
And so to that person I would say that says not today, I would just say just one more day of doing it.
Yeah.
All you need to focus on is just one more day. And then tomorrow you can reevaluate.
It's only half an hour. It's only 45 minutes.
Just one more day. Just one more day. And so and you see how that kind of flips the script a little bit rather than just not today, I just can't do it. Okay, I'm just going to do it one more day.
Mm-hmm.
One more day.
And then I'll quit tomorrow.
You can say that.
Just make sure you always quit tomorrow.
Because tomorrow never comes.
Right. Quit tomorrow. It's fine. You can quit whenever you want. Just don't quit today. Just do it any other day except for today.
Yeah.
Quit tomorrow.
And I think our willingness to do hard work is directly correlated to the amount of success for the amount of success and fulfillment that we'll have in life. Mm-hmm. The degree to which we're willing to do hard things and to do things that make us uncomfortable is the degree to which ultimately we'll be able to reach our goals and to find fulfillment.
I found in some ways it actually can be addicting to do the uncomfortable things.
Yeah, well, it's a muscle, so to speak, that you have to exercise.
Yeah, it's kind of like your little pipsqueak who wants to sit on the couch, be a potato. No, I'm gonna do the hard thing. I'm gonna do the thing I don't want to do.
Yep.
Because I want to be better than what I am today.
Right.
Yeah.
So practice those strategies, and then the last and fourth one is to reinforce the positive patterns, and this is really important as well. Is we have to really maintaining our emotional health and building a positive lifestyle. You have to reinforce the patterns, and one of the big big barriers we have to overcome is negative thought patterns are very self-reinforcing. I can't do this because I'm so tired. I'm always going to fail I'm always going to fail a test, so therefore I'm not even going to study. Well, that's really reinforcing because it allows I call it the comfort disease to sneak in, and rather than doing the hard work of studying for a test, for example, we give Netflix more of our time,
right?
And that's at the time it's comforting, not very fulfilling, but that in of itself is very reinforcing.
Yeah.
So you're giving yourself the reward for failing a test. In this example, would be spending more time on Netflix, and you can kind of see how that's kind of self-reinforcing. And so we have to make a conscious, in order to be emotionally healthy, we have to make a point of reinforcing the positive behaviors, whether it's behaviors, thoughts, or emotions, through I call repetition and self-reward.
You're going to be so glad you do it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
you're so glad that you suffer through that.
Right.
That discomfort.
Yeah.
It's the pain of discipline or the pain of regret.
Exactly.
That's a very well used, very well known statement. But man, it's probably about as true as you can possibly get.
Yeah. Yep. So to kind of wrap it all up and tie it with a bow and whatever else you want to use, whatever statement you want to use, there's kind of 4 steps to maintaining our emotional health. The first one is to recognize and label your thoughts. And again, the whole point of that is our thoughts. I believe firmly that our thoughts drive our emotions. If our thoughts are negative, if our thoughts have that negative flavor to them, our emotions are going to follow suit.
Mm-hmm.
So again, recognize and label your thoughts and identify what thoughts are negative and what thoughts aren't. And that for a lot of us, it's very uncomfortable to write that down because it forces us to reckon with kind of how counterproductive our thought processes can be.
Right.
So again, recognize and label your thoughts, challenge negative or distorted thinking. And so what that means is, you can't just write down your thoughts. You have to do something with them. You have to reckon with them and wrestle with them, and take those thoughts captive and say, is this true or is this not true?
Mm-hmm.
Third, then you got to practice adaptive coping strategies. That's kind of that's a therapy's word. But the other way to say it is to practice replacing unhealthy behaviors with healthier ones.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of the work comes in for a lot of us, is to make
Right.
a conscious effort to do that, because you're building a new habit. And then the last one is to reinforce those positive patterns that you've been developing.
Easy enough. I mean, if everyone just followed this for, I don't even just say, you could even say like a couple of weeks, people would be feeling so much better about themselves.
Yeah.
And then it'd be a lot easier to stick with it. And then it can become not a new habit, but a change in your lifestyle.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Be good stuff. Any other anything else, Josh, you want to talk about? Anything you want to recommend to the people, or are we all good for the day?
I'm good for the day. I would bring up that Power of One More books, just as it came up in our conversation. But really, at the end of the day, it's really what this is about, is just being aware of what we're saying to ourselves internally.
Right.
We are our own worst critic.
And also our biggest fan.
True, at times.
I mean, it's the choice.
Exactly.
It's either we want to be our biggest fan and annoy some people,
right?
Because it shows their negative Nanciness, or just be a negative Nancy to ourselves, and we don't want to. No one wants that. So
right.
Let's just choose to be positive and choose to be the best people we can be this year.
Right.
So. Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the nonStatic podcast. If you'd like to stay connected and dive deeper into finding peace, focus, and fulfillment, just be sure to sign up for the nonStatic newsletter at nonstatic.org. Also, subscribe and like and share, do all the things to the podcast, however you listen to it. We'd love to get this out to more and more people. And also just remember, if you or somebody you know is struggling with their mental health, we're here to help. Reach out to us or anyone in your area that is a mental health therapist, and we can help you beat the negative Nancy in your mind. Yep. And help you get on the right path to your best life. So take care.
Enjoy the journey.